Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's episode of Psyched. I'm here, Angela Bixby with Energy Into It. I'm here with Dr. Suzanne Manser, and we've been having a blast having these conversations that we're labeling Psyched, conversations between a psychologist and a psychic, and differences and similarities of things that go on in our practices. So today we're going to talk about three things. We're going to talk about how clients present with fear and anxiety, what that's like for us as practitioners, and how we help our clients move through that. We're going to talk about what might constitute a good or successful session for each of us in our practices. And then we're going to end with talking a little bit about how we each address self-care, given that we're both in these supportive, nurturing professions. Today, I'm going to go ahead and let Suzanne jump in and tell us a bit about what it's like in her practice when she has patients come in that are in fear and anxiety.
Hey, Angela, it's good to see you today. So I am, one of my specialties is anxiety. So I do tend to see a lot of patients with anxiety and fear and stress and everything that gets rolled up in that particular category. Um, and I think a lot of people come in with the idea that the goal is to no longer feel anxiety or stress or fear, that we're supposed to just kind of get rid of it and make life stress-free, which would be lovely. I wish we could do that. But that's generally not actually a realistic goal because life is stressful and there are things that would cause us anxiety and all of those things. So part of what I really try to do with folks when they walk in wanting to work on anxiety and stress is just start to understand their anxiety and stress and get a little bit of distance from it. So I often talk about there's a way of thinking about emotions and feelings that talks about emotions as messengers.
Mm.
So the idea that when anxiety shows up, it's got a message for us. And the message that anxiety has in particular is that there is a danger afoot, that there's something threatening us. So it's trying to get us kind of activated to go handle this danger. So one of the things that I work with people on is let's just take that as a concept, the idea that maybe your anxiety has showed up to tell you or to suggest that there's something to feel threatened by or something dangerous
Mm.
happening. There might not actually be something dangerous happening. Often anxiety shows up kind of misinformed, so to speak. And so it's really important to just kind of take that moment, take that pause and get a little, look at your anxiety and sort of check in with yourself. Is there anything to be anxious about? Oftentimes there isn't. That doesn't mean it's so easy to suddenly not feel anxious anymore, but it gives you a way of relating to the anxiety that kind of keeps you in charge. You're the one doing the deciding about whether you need to actually focus on your anxiety or not. And that experience of yourself as being in charge, again, you're not totally in control, but you're in charge of how you relate to your anxiety or your emotions. That's generally what I'm trying to work on with my patients is being in charge, having a little bit more distance, and realizing that when you do get in charge, the anxiety may not go away entirely, but you can make it feel either smaller or farther away so that it doesn't kind of
Mhm.
color your whole experience. So
Beautiful.
that's sort of the general angle that I take.
Yeah, I hear you. I have a question for you. How many people show up in your practice for like they already know that they have anxiety? So perhaps how they show up, is it differently than someone who maybe doesn't realize they have anxiety or is having just sort of like new patient anxiety? Because when you were talking, and I love that you talk about anxiety bringing messages because you're speaking my language now as a psychic, and I'm like, yes, there are things that it wants to tell us. But I was also having these visions of like perhaps some patients that you have come in that do already know they have anxiety. They might come in and say something like, I have anxiety, and just let me just breathe for a minute. So I'm just curious, kind of like, what that looks like for you with your patients.
That's a really good question. And it makes me think of myself because I didn't know that I had anxiety for a very long time because it didn't show up in this kind of the way that I think people tend to think about it, like worrying,
Hmm.
is maybe a
Hmm.
primary way people think about anxiety. So my form of anxiety is overthinking, over preparing, that sort of like overdoing. And I see a lot of people when they come in with those sort of symptoms or signs, they don't recognize that as anxiety. They think that they're doing a good job of preparing for the future. So when I put that angle on it and I, help them see that their overthinking or over preparing is unnecessary, is expending a lot of extra energy, and is really just in service of keeping them protected from a thing that isn't happening and may not happen. That helps people oftentimes to categorize what they're experiencing as anxiety. But it's really common actually that people do not see themselves as anxious when in fact that's what's motivating a lot of their behaviors.
Amen. Please forgive me. I'm not a religious person, but I love using that sometimes, right? Like it lands so well. I say that because, I didn't realize that I had anxiety, except that when I started this second career in my early 40s, right? And left being, a paycheck person and having my, hanging a shingle and being a psychic and all of that. I noticed it became apparent to me how much I talked or over talked or did a little bit of that, like planning ahead and over planning, like you're talking about, that I just had no idea was anxiety until I had one of my clients who's a therapist like touch me on the arm and go, "You have anxiety, don't you?" And I was like, "No, do I?" So I totally relate to what you're saying. I didn't know that I was having it either. Mine lined up also with perimenopause. So it could be that that's part of why it was ushered in. But yeah, I relate to that. Fascinating.
I
Great.
think that the tendency to, when I use the word catastrophize with people, that's another word that tends to get people like, oh, that is exactly what I do.
Mhm.
But that tendency of sort of seeing the worst happening and
Mhm.
then preparing for it or overthinking about it, but that tendency to see the worst happening and then getting really compelled by that, really hooked into it. People are
Mhm.
so compelled by it that they just assume everybody thinks this way or that they're
Mhm.
just seeing what's naturally going to happen next and they're preparing for it. They don't realize that it's actually that would be catastrophic if that thing happened, and that's a
Mhm.
particular way of thinking. So yeah,
Yeah,
it's real. Anxiety is a very varied disorder or set of signs and symptoms.
absolutely. I know. And I feel like I keep learning more about it every day and every week. Fascinating. And I love hearing your gnosis on it all and your wisdom on it all and experience. Thank you for that. So, for you and your clients, your patients, excuse me, do you Do you find that you face them having to deal with their anxiety right away in a session, or is it just more that once they come into a session and you guys kind of establish ground rules and you start working together, is there less of it?
That's a really great question. Both, for sure. There are
Mhm.
times when patients come in and they're so ungrounded. They're so
Mhm.
wound up. I mean, you can almost sometimes see somebody kind of vibrating, with anxiety, or they're just so spun up in their story
Mhm.
that we kind of can't do any work with the story until we just ground them. And so
Mhm.
I'll just sit with patients sometimes and we'll do some deep breathing or we'll do a quick grounded meditation or there's a 5 4 3 2 1 exercise that I do a lot. But just we take, 2 minutes, 5 minutes, 10 minutes to just kind of calm the body, calm the brain, and center ourselves so that we can be more thoughtful and intentional about what we focus on rather than letting the anxiety guide us.
Beautiful. Love that. Thank you. Yeah. So, again, psychologist, therapist, and a psychic here. So, when people come to me for one-on-one sessions, which is generally, well, I'm tapping both that and people that I work with long term within programs too when I talk about this, but we'll take it for a session. So if someone's coming in for a reading or a session, coming to Zoom, I do all of my work online now, not in person anymore. But if they're coming to me, if they're meeting with me on Zoom to have a session, there can be well, first of all, let me back up a little bit. It's rare that people come to me very regularly for readings. They're totally allowed to. I tell them they can self-discover. I've had maybe 3 cases over 15 years where people I felt like they were really coming too frequently and weren't really utilizing the information. And I was like, I think you're wasting your money. So it was only 3 people that I was like, I think this is a little too much. Other than that, there are lots of times when people are going through something and they might want to have a number of sessions over a couple of months. It's not unusual, but often it's mostly one-off sessions, right? And so for people's experiencing my clients' anxiety, first off, I'm an empath and I've been an empath all my life and didn't realize that. So, what that means for me is I have always, since I can remember, and I'm 58, so since I was very little, have felt not only my emotions, but have been very aware of those emotions around me. I guess actually something's flashing into my mind now as a message. Maybe 4 or 5 is when I really have that awareness of that I was sort of feeling and experiencing other people's emotions in the family or maybe in a classroom or what have you. So the way that would look to my family is I was that middle kid who was like always crying at the drop of a hat. That's how my parents sort of described it. And they were always like, God, why is Angie crying again? Why is Angela crying? What's going on with her? And so just, we didn't know what we didn't know. That was in the late 60s, early 70s. So it was a long time ago. And while my parents were very cool, nobody realized that I was like a psychic empath. So I've always been attuned to feeling more emotions than just my own. And so it's, could be people around me at that time as a child. It would have been different emotions of things when things would come up in the family and maybe, at school and things. And as I got older, it became, and certainly since I do this work professionally now, fast forward a bunch of decades where I can be feeling people's emotions that are not proximal to me because there isn't a space and time. So us having the capacity to vibe someone else's emotions, it's very real when you're when you're wired a little bit the way I am with the sensitivities. And so now before a session, if a client has anxiety, I often feel it from them before they even come to the session, is why I said all of that to try to set the table here. And so if I have a client session at 6 p.m. or 2 p.m. or whatever, I will probably wake up in the morning if the person has anxiety and will be feeling anxiety and will recognize that it's not mine. And this is what I go through every day, actually, because it'll be collective energy. It might be different clients coming on my schedule. It might be someone in my life that's moving through something hard. And you and I have been talking about our content lately. We know and acknowledge and witness that all of us are moving through so much density and hardness, anxiety, depression, all the things. Like there's so much going on right now that is leading us all to experience a lot of these heavy emotions, which is what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about being that special, but just to say that like I'll wake up and can sort of almost like feel into what a lot of other people are feeling at any given time. And so hopefully my saying that also helps people listening for them to understand maybe how they're an empath too. Back to the patients with anxiety or clients with anxiety that I might be seeing. So I'll tend to have a little bit of a heads up about it. If I don't have a heads up about it, I'll feel it right as we're getting on the call, or maybe it'll just be a couple minutes before the call starts. I might feel them getting anxious. So I tend to have an idea of whether it feels like that they deal with an anxiety disorder, a lot of anxiety, or whether it feels a little situational. It's hard to explain, but I kind of feel that sometimes. And so I have clients that show up with anxiety a lot, sometimes just because whether they've worked with a psychic medium or not, they might be kind of like excited, anticipating what they might hear, depending on the nature of what they want to get into in their session. They might be really overwhelmed and a little worried about what might come up, especially if it's something really consequential, like, for instance, their parent passed away a year ago and they're deciding to have a first session with a medium and hope to make connection and aren't sure if that will be successful, right? And all of the things that can come into that anxiety wise, emotion wise. And then I've had quite a few clients say to me that they show up nervous and anxious because, this is kind of weird what I do. And they're not sure if I'm going to bring forward any weird shit that they didn't ask about, pardon my language. So people do present all the time with anxiety in all different ways in my practice when they come to a session. And so, generally speaking, regardless of what it is that's causing it for them, as I jump into the session with them and, give them a tiny bit of spiel and just make that connection with them, they often will say, "Oh my gosh, I'm already at ease. I was really nervous coming into the call," or "I'm worried you're going to bring up something weird. How does this go?" Right. And we talk about it up front, and so that we can kind of diffuse it and then not let that be like distracting to them throughout the session. Because I want them to be able to feel grounded and present in the session because they often will also feel things that they've never felt before. Like they'll feel things move in their body and they'll be like, "Oh my gosh, it feels like my energy is being served." Right. So I want them to be able to have an optimal experience. I'm always ready to help them kind of squash that stuff if we can at the beginning. And then even beyond that, and I forgot to mention this up front, I send out guidelines for my clients to read through and prepare before they come to a session. So I also take that big extra step to encourage them to show up grounded, clear-minded, assuring them that we're going to, by and large, only deal with the things that they bring that they want to ask questions about. So I try to set that tone ahead of time, especially if that might have been the source of their anxiety, not knowing what's going to come up. Now, there are times that if something will come in out of left field. And I'll say to the client, now something's coming in out of left field, it's off topic from your questions. Is it okay if I offer it to you? So I ask their permission by and large for that because it does happen occasionally, maybe 10% of the time. So it doesn't happen a ton, but it will happen every once in a while. So those are the ways that I try to meet my clients for the experience and anticipate anxiety for them or help them kind of just get grounded in their body, as you mentioned that you do with your patients, so that we can then get into the session and do what we do there.
Can I, Angela, bring up the first time that I met with you and had a reading with you? Because that's what prompted part of us talking about this today. When it was 2018, when I was maybe 3 or 4 months from moving to Portland from Santa Barbara, and I was just in a super anxious place in my life around the move mostly. Um, and I had learned about you from a friend, and I had never had any experience with any psychic readings before or anything. Um, and I was just feeling so ungrounded is an understatement. I was feeling completely at a loss. I have never been so anxious in my life as I was at that period of time. And
Mm,
I remember where I was sitting. I remember I had a piece of paper in front of me and a pen. I had read through your guidelines about being grounded, and I was like, I am not grounded, but I'm as grounded as I can get. Um, and I didn't even know what to ask. Like I'm a very concrete person. I did not know what to ask. And so I just, someday we'll have to talk about what you thought, but the entire session was me asking about my spirit guides or yeah, my spirit guides, because I
mm,
didn't know what else to ask. And so it
mhm,
was just like, okay, who's next? Who's next? And you just were
mhm,
like, okay, here's who's showing up. And it was
mhm,
however long our session was of like, guide after guide after guide after guide after guide. And I remember one of them in particular was like a grandfather type who was sitting in the bleachers
mhm,
cheering me on. And so so I want to say two things about that. One, as a psychic, as a professional, as the person I was working with, I so appreciated how you
mhm,
contained my anxiety in that session. I felt very seen. I felt very
mhm,
held. You didn't try to get rid of it. You didn't try to really do anything with it. You just met me where I was. And I just really appreciated that. I could feel that you were in tune with me.
mhm,
So just your presence was so, so, so helpful. And then the content of the experience, hearing about all of these beings who were had the intention of helping me, who wanted to help me. Oh my gosh, I could get teary right now. I had never experienced like, oh my gosh, there are beings out there who want to help me. That was like wild. And so
mhm.
just that concept too was like I have kept that grandfather figure in my heart. Like, thank you for whoever you are, just for wanting to cheer me on. So I just want to, from experience, sort of anecdotally, that was my
Mhm.
experience of coming to you with a ton of anxiety. And I didn't come away feeling no anxiety because again, that wouldn't have made sense. But now
Mhm.
I had a connection. I felt connected to you. I felt supported by you in
Mhm.
that connection. And then I had sort of these tools of these beings that I could connect with who I knew were supporting me. And so again, just as the experience of a client, it was just incredibly helpful. So thank you for that.
You are welcome. You are so welcome. Thank you for recounting all of that and sharing that. And I remember some things and I don't remember a lot, especially from client sessions. I just do the mind erase thing. It's best for everybody for, me not to dwell on their energy, etc., out of respect for how I know energy moves. So I didn't remember a lot of details about the spirit guides and things. So I'm really glad to hear that it supported you so well. And I just got done saying to you about in my client sessions, we're squash that anxiety. So I liked you explaining that like you didn't feel like I treated you as though it has to go away. So thank you for that too, because there's always room for people's anxiety and whatever else they might be dealing with. in a session, and I do pride myself on that. Again, the differences between our work, when I jump onto a session with someone, I'm not cheap, but I'm not expensive. I mean, I am. Some people might consider me really expensive, but in terms of like prices of psychics across the board is what I'm saying. Like I'm kind of middle of the road if you look internationally at the prices at least. And so, but I'm always looking out for my client. I'm like, let's just jump in with your first question and see how it goes. Because I know through my process that people do calm down as soon as we get into the session. And I haven't had a ton of people where we've had to then revisit their anxiety throughout the session. So I love hearing that feedback from you, but also just trying to also set the stage for people that are listening to us, might be thinking about having a reading with someone and wondering how that practitioner handles that if there's someone that has anxiety. So just being a little thorough on that too. Yeah. So cool. It's so cool to remember that time that we worked together, your first session.
Oh my gosh. Man, I was anxious. That is, whew, I was vibrating. I was so anxious.
Oh, I love what you said about the guides though too. I mean, that is one of the beautiful things about the work that I do is, I know that now for myself through doing this work. And so I love to hear when clients have also felt supported, especially when they come to the session having never done this. And dare I say, as I recall, you were an atheist when we met. And so you just any of kind of the spiritual support stuff was just not your jam, correct? Is that fair to say?
Absolutely. Yeah.
So to
Yeah.
hear that you got so much from that first session and really, delighted in that, I love. And I think that's a great testament to your capacity to shift quickly. Seriously.
Thank you. I hadn't thought about it
Yeah.
that way.
So, question for you, and this can apply to clients, patients with anxiety or not. What would you consider, like how would you describe that a session was successful?
Great question. I think the easy answer or the answer most people might expect would be, some part of the issue was handled, some part of the issue was solved that the person came in with. And while that would absolutely be part of a successful session, that does not happen every session. It's much more of a long game than a short game most of the time because of the
Mhm.
complicated issues that most people bring in.
Mhm.
So I consider a successful session when the person I'm working with feels seen and heard, when I have successfully made room for them, um, when they feel attuned to. Um, and then I think I was going to say bonus when they also feel like they're walking away with a new tool or a new whatever. And it's not, I mean, it's not bonus because it does happen a good chunk of the time, but not every
Mhm.
time.
Mhm.
But for me, success comes from connection, really. And
Mhm.
there's the research in therapy is, and it's so robust. This is what I did my dissertation on 20 something years ago, but is still the case, is that it doesn't the type of therapy you do, the actual approach that you use is um, much less relevant to outcome. It doesn't really speak to outcome. What speaks to outcome is the alliance that the therapist and the patient have, the rapport, the
Mhm.
connection, the shared sense of goals.
Mhm.
All of that is what actually contributes to good outcomes when we're talking about the outcome of the entire work of therapy.
Mhm.
So talking about an individual session, that's where my aim really is making sure that the alliance is solid and
Mhm.
then working with actual strategies and tools to make sure that the person has something that they can walk away with.
Beautiful. I love that connection and alliance with their practitioner. That makes so much sense. And I love that the research shows that because, yeah, it makes complete sense to me. And interesting, though, even to hear what you mentioned that type of modality, you didn't say it that way, but that's the way I heard
Mhm.
it. Type of
Mhm.
modality has less consequence than that the actual connection and the alliance is the most important piece. It's really cool to hear.
Yeah, I think, and it makes so much sense
Hmm.
because, what works for me is not necessarily going to work for somebody else in terms of
Hmm.
modality, but feeling seen and heard and connected is always going to support the work. So yeah, it makes total sense.
Yeah, so cool. Yeah, successful session for me in my practice. I should say let me put it this way. I I would say, because I love to teach people to connect their intuition, and that's a big part of my business. But if someone's coming to me for a session and if they feel like their list of questions that they brought to go over, if they felt like they kind of knew the answers and I affirmed what they already knew, I would deem that a very successful session. They like that, but I don't know that they would call it successful because there's certainly a lot of, you know, it's more than entertainment value. Although I do that, this work is technically, for entertainment, not for therapy, of course, those kinds of distinctions. But there are a lot of people that really like it when things come in that they'll ask a question and like solutions come in or topics come in and a lot of granular detail that they had no idea it would go that deep. Right. So I would say a lot of clients might consider a session successful if they were very wowed, right?
Hmm.
But I would determine success if someone comes in with like they have a sense of what spirit's going to say anyway, and they were just affirmed, because to me that has more of that long game quality for them, and that I know they're like kind of off and running a bit more with their intuition, and that's going to really serve them ultimately, right? So yeah, I think my clients and I would describe it differently.
But that's a really good point that you're making about the sort of long-term and short-term nature, because I think
Mhm.
probably both your clients and mine do have a little bit more focus on the short term, like let's get it fixed,
Mhm.
or let's get the problem solved or the answered, rather
Mhm.
than let me change my relationship with my intuition or let me build my self-trust or whatever it
Mhm.
might be. That's sort of the
Mhm.
longer game.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, exactly. Fun. All right, last question for you. Well, let me back up. We both have heart-centered businesses, and the work that we do is holding space and helping and supporting clients in our respective ways. Clients and patients. So, how do you handle self-care for yourself?
Such a big question. And it probably changes every day, but I have to say, I have recently gotten off of most social media and I'm trying to use my time instead of scrolling to, I've started like baking bread and baking muffins and watercoloring and like things that I've never done before. So, I cannot tell you, and it just sounds so cliche, but like that really, really has made a difference in terms of just general energy level. I'm not nearly as drained. I was walking around so angry because of what's going on in the world and me
Mhm.
reading way too much social media stuff. I was just so angry all the time that I wasn't
Mhm.
effective, being a social activist or being a kind person sometimes. I was just so angry. So
Mhm.
anyway, for me, self-care is creating a life that you want to live in. So for me, that means getting away from the stuff that is pulling me in directions that don't serve me, and forcing myself to go in directions that do serve me, even if it feels like it takes a little bit more effort than I feel like I have at the moment. But so that's been my kind of journey at the moment is this, it's effortful to get out all my watercolors and I don't really know what I'm doing. So it doesn't, I don't always produce something that I love and whatever.
Mhm.
But the act of watercoloring for me, I'll do it for an hour or 2 hours and I am not thinking about what's going on in the world. I am not feeling anybody else's feelings. I am not trying to solve any problems. I am just focused on trying to make a freaking bunny or whatever it is. And the break in, you know, input and feelings and everything else is huge. So taking a break, I guess, and reducing
Mhm.
input has been more of a self-care angle for me these days. How about you, Angela?
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you for that. And I will address your how about you, Angela. I just want to say I'm really happy for you because what I hear you saying is that you're also, even though it doesn't feel natural to have potentially turned to, say, watercoloring, and you just sort of show up and do it. I'm really happy that you're able to do that because I think that's half the battle for most people when they think about self-care too. Is it can be easy to blow it off, right? But you're honoring these spaces of time with yourself and you're like, well, okay, I'm not scrolling, I'm doing this. I feel like you illustrated a lot in what it can be like to create new and healthy habits for ourselves. So thank you for the details on that, because I think it probably helped a lot of people to hear that sincerely. For
Yeah.
me, self-care, I easily get burned out, and then I find myself being in, like, resentment. I've worked too much. I've taken in too many people's things. And so it's been hard for me as a solitary, self-employed person to make some of the shifts within my business to allow for more self-care, right? And I this was a hobby for me before it was a business. It's always been a labor of love, and I really, really, really love what I do and get a lot of satisfaction. And I'm kind of a workaholic anyway. So like I didn't realize how much I was potentially harming myself with burnout by overworking and just, yeah, let me fit that one more client in. And sure, let me work 6 days, right? Things that, I know, even hearing it now, I'm like, I'm trying to keep it to 4 days now, 4 or 5. So for me, actually, my guides in the universe needed to step in and help me with some of the shifts in my business so that I'm less busy, so that I have more gaps of time where I'm not doing a lot, right? So rest, I could call that. The universe helped me with that. I've also been intentionally and consciously focusing on rest a lot more. I'm also in a different situation as you, in that, my sons are 28 and 30. My 28-year-old just sort of launched really well last summer. And so I am like truly an empty nester now. He's living out of state. And I have so much less stress, about things like that as a mom, worrying about their adult kids and such. So it's kind of the nature of my self-care has shifted with that, because I am someone who lives alone and I'm self-employed and work from home. And so I have a lot of time to fit things in the past, it was often things like massages and getting manicures and all of that. And it's really shifted over the last couple of years for me. And rest is really where it feels like it's at. Rest and play, but also just allowing myself to kind of have that, be in that privileged space to be able to just kind of not do a lot for a few hours on a given day, if that's what that looks like, right? So self-care has really radically changed for me in the last year, but I would say rest is the biggest thrust that's really serving me well these days, as well as I've been baking bread. Just started doing that this winter too, so I'm sharing that hobby with you.
That makes me think of our last conversation about, or maybe it wasn't our last, whenever we talked about the patriarchy,
Mhm.
and just the like, yeah, add the next patient, do more, do more, do more, be your best self. Like that is such a
Mhm.
patriarchal attitude, and the idea
Mhm.
of actually resting and allowing yourself space, I think, is just not the way we've been trained. So I'm so glad for both of us that we're doing more of that.
Yeah, me too. Yay. All right. Well, this has been Psyched. We're recording on Friday, March 6th, although this will go up in the next few days for each of us in our respective places that we like to post it. Thanks for being here today with us, you guys. Those of you listening, if you would please muster a like or a share with someone that you think might benefit from our conversation, we would both appreciate it. And always feel free to comment. We love suggestions about topics you'd like to see us talk about. So thank you again, Suzanne. It's always a joy to be here with you. I will see you and our audience next time. Take care.